And there's Randy Johnson standing on the mound. And I'm like, well, I'm going to die. And that's how I died. The dollar is heroin. Because you've injected it, and then once you inject the heroin, you need more and more and more and more and more. And then it gets to a point where if you stop using the heroin, you're going to die. Elizabeth Warren doesn't want people to be able to memorize 12 words or have bits fly across the internet like, wonder why. The dollar isn't money. The dollar, you could maybe say, is currency, but the dollar is a debt instrument. You can't own a whole dollar. The value of your dollar that you have in your wallet is contingent upon the fact of more and more people, corporations, and governments getting into more and more debt forever. What happens when that debt is due? They don't have the money. Nobody has the money. It's like if you have a credit card bill and you have no money, you get another credit card, and you pay that credit card. It's all debt. It's all leverage, right? So it's like there is no money in this scenario. It's all debt. If you suppress the expansion of dollars, you're going to go into a deflationary collapse. In order to keep this orderly and things from collapsing overnight, you have to keep printing more and more and more dollars. There's no choice. And every central bank in the world knows this. They all know this. This is not, no one is hiding. If I talk about the dollar or deflation, no one's hiding the ball. This is not conspiracy theory. It's all there. This is not rocket science.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally.
When you understand that they have no choice, again, let's make this very simple. Supply and demand. Right? The more you increase the supply of something, the less it's going to be worth.
Flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
They have to keep increasing the supply of dollars. There's no choice. There's no choice.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
There is no end to our ability to do that.
The other thing about Bitcoin is like, it's not going to stop. It's just not going to stop. Like the wind is at our back, and it's a drumbeat. People don't understand how their car works. They still use their car because they don't have a choice. You don't have a choice. I love you all. You're going to have to figure out Bitcoin. It's not going away. You can tune out of this conversation, and 3 years later, it's still, the drumbeat is still going to be going on. In my day, I didn't have any money or any internet. All I had were dirt and rocks, and I had to catch Randy Johnson, and it was hard.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 856355, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. I hope you enjoyed that special little intro, and it felt fitting for today's guest on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. That guest is actor, producer, writer, and a bunch of other stuff, Joel Heyman, which is also just a sweet last name. Joel is probably best known for his work with Rooster Teeth Productions, where they basically pioneered the idea of web series in America long before YouTube even existed. Joel is a fascinating guy who I've known as a Twitter or X friend for some time, and he also happens to be a hardcore Bitcoiner. He's an Austrian buff and a general monetary policy aficionado. He's also just fucking hilarious. I was extremely stoked to get Joel on the show because according to him, for the past 15 years, people have asked him to do podcasts on finance or economics or Bitcoin, but he has resisted until today. And our conversation was an absolute fucking blast. I highly recommend you follow Joel on X via the link in the show notes. He is a great follow. And if you're on Nostr, I've also linked his NPub there as well. Feel free to bully him so he starts using Nostr more. I sure enjoyed the hell out of making this episode with Joel, and I know that you are going to love listening to it. Before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening or watching, and check out my sponsor Bitbox in the show notes, or go directly to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. You can also grab links to protect your digital life from SimSwap attacks using Afani and Cloaked Wireless. I am a one-man show, so when you use my partner links, it genuinely helps me keep this show running, and I truly appreciate it. If you'd rather watch this show than listen, head to the show notes for links to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and Noster via Highlighter. But if you are like me and you prefer to just listen to your podcast while doing something else, then I highly recommend you check out Fountain.fm. Not only can you send Bitcoin to your favorite podcasters to give value for value, but you can earn Bitcoin just for listening to this and other podcasts. Finally, if you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, hit me up on social media or through the website bitcoinpodcast.net. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Joel Heyman. You know, I learned from Peter McCormick, who's probably the most prolific Bitcoin podcaster. I had him on and interviewed him, kind of podcasting about podcasting, very meta. And he was like, "You got to do the pre-roll, man. You just got to record everything. You never know what you're going to get."
No, that's
like,
true.
Okay, like I'll listen too. But yeah, so I cut you off in the middle just to hit that record button, and now I feel guilty about it. But you were just saying, like, you've been in this business a while.
Well, the thing is that, I've had requests over the years to do podcasts, my own podcast or other people's podcasts, and I've resisted it greatly. One of it just because my schedule just had been impossible is the first thing. I just haven't been able to fit it in. The other thing is there's nothing worse than listening to a celebrity talk like economics or politics. Right? Not that I'm a celebrity. I'm like a D+ celebrity or whatever, but nobody wants to
like
hear
C-
that.
though, like probably C-. I'd get
Whatever
you,
it is,
nobody
needs to hear it. So it's like, I don't want to be that guy, but I have been looking at stuff for a while. I am old. I remember the 70s. Like, I remember inflation. I remember Jimmy Carter. I remember U.S. debt denominated in Swiss francs because people didn't trust the dollar. That was Volcker. We started Volcker. We went from the 70s to the 80s, went from Volcker to Greenspan. Interest rates kept dropping. That was when stocks became a thing, because that's when the credit expansion started. I remember the G5 trying to devalue the dollar, and then that causing the crash of 1987, and that was exacerbated by, a portfolio insurance, right? And that is when the Greenspan put started. It was in the late 80s, and I remember that. There's 3 themes we have for this podcast, sir.
Okay.
I've wrote it down. Ready? It's savings,
I love
adoption, heroin. These are our 3. We're going to get back to these topics. So we went from 87. We had the crash of 87. The Greenspan put. You're going to start noticing a pattern. We went from the 80s to the 90s. We blew up a NASDAQ bubble because interest rates kept falling. Right, the NASDAQ bubble popped, and we had a central bank response to cut that started with the Asian contagion in '98. Right, there was a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management. When that thing blew up, that spread to Russia and Mexico. That blew up the ruble and the peso. And again, I remember the morning. I remember 10 in the morning watching CNBC where it's like, hey, we're going to have an emergency rate cut because of long-term capital management. Again, it's the same pattern, right? You have a bubble bursts, central bank intervention. So we went from the NASDAQ bubble, and then we didn't take the pain, and we blew up a housing bubble, right? In the early aughts. And so I remember all of this. And I certainly understand the pattern. And the Greenspan put, we went from Volcker to Greenspan to Bernanke to Yellen. And the Greenspan put is still with us and very much alive because it has to be. So I've been investing the whole time. I remember the 80s. I was poor as hell. My dad was in the Army. I've been moving around my whole life. I finally landed in Texas. I went to the University of Texas, and then I made the decision where it's like, hey, I'm going to go be an actor, which is basically the same statement as saying, hey, I'm going to go be poor for a living. And I was very, very poor. But I went to Los Angeles with $2,000. And my first year in Los Angeles, I made $12,000. But back then it was easier, right? Because I didn't have a cell phone bill. I didn't have an internet bill. It wasn't illegal to not have car insurance. You didn't have to have car insurance. Food was cheaper. It was easier to be poor back then, right? So I could do it, and I was poor for a long time. But no matter how poor I was, I realized I had to have savings because I had to have investment because I had to have hope, right? So no matter how bad it was, I saved the entire time and I invested the entire time. It's like I saved all those checks from being a kid, like during your birthday, and like I lost like 80% of it in the NASDAQ bubble. I didn't have much money, so it was like, not the end of the world or whatever. But so, I was a poor, starving actor. And in 2003, some friends of mine from college, we decided to start a website. It was called Rooster Teeth. It was a production company. And we started with a web series, and the web series was called Red versus Blue. It's the longest running web series of all time. Went almost about 20 years or something like that. So I remember 2003 was before Twitter. It was before YouTube. It was before social media. And we had a social component on our website. So I was doing social media in 2003, 2004, 2005. And I was extremely lucky to be associated with some incredibly talented people. Like the people at Rooster Teeth were great people, incredibly talented, hardworking, industrious, and they all brought different things to the table. And so I really benefited from that. But the offshoot of this, and I can work this into Bitcoin, believe it or not, because it was before Bitcoin's existence, is that I was very ground up, right? So it's like I have had every experience in entertainment where I've been the lowest guy in the totem pole and I've been the highest guy in the totem pole. And I've been everything in between. So it's funny because like from 2003 to 2008, I would go around the world and I go around the country and I go to different conventions, right? I go to comic book conventions. I did hundreds. I did like 100 conventions. Jesus. And I was internet famous at the time before internet famous was a thing. Right. And it was very strange. It was like, if you go to these conventions, it's really funny. I gotta drink water real quick.
Yeah, do it.
If you go to these conventions, if you go to like Comic-Con, right, and they have these big stars, right? These big stars, they have a certain like experience where you're like the headliner and they fly you in and you go in and you sign autographs for 2 hours and you're done. But we had like a production company. We were selling stuff, right? So we're like selling T-shirts and we're selling DVDs. So like I'm sitting at that table from the beginning of the day till the end of the day, every day, and we're selling goods, right? We're signing the entire time. We're signing autographs the entire time. I signed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of autographs all over the place. But the side shoot of this is that I got to meet people. I got to meet a lot of people, and they treated me great. We had just the greatest fans in the world, and I have this sickness of finance in me, and I've had it the whole time, and so I'd have these conversations. And I was a gold bug, right?
Okay.
And I remember trying to explain gold to people, and they would have absolutely no idea of what I was talking about. People absolutely, positively did not understand gold. And I was in a weird position where it's like I'm an entertainer, so they like me, so they're going to endure me. They're going to tolerate me. They're going to be nice about it. Again, it's like nobody wants to hear this stuff from an entertainer, so whatever. But it's like, I had the experience of meeting thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It was a great experience. And I talked to people at work, and I talked to, like, nobody understood what the hell I was talking about. If I talked about gold, people were like, why are you speaking Japanese to me? They absolutely had no understanding of it. So 2008 happens, and we get that collapse. My older brother's in finance, and so he kind of understood it. And I understood it to the point where I still was going to buy a house, but I didn't understand the depth of it. And I didn't understand it was really a Eurodollar problem. It was a really big problem, but it's the same problem that has been going on since 87, right? It's the same issue. So that happened. And still nobody knows what I'm talking about. I was a libertarian. I was Austrian. I was a gold bug. So, and I was on Twitter. I was in Twitter 2008. And so I used to follow Max Kaiser, right? He used to follow me when he was on his old account. And so we used to follow each other. I would watch his show. And I think it was around 2010. He's like, hey, look at this Bitcoin thing. I'm like, what is this? And I went and looked at it. And I instantly understood it. I instantly understood. This was the sly roundabout way. This was it. I absolutely understood it. I say I understood it, but I didn't understand it. Why didn't I understand it? Because two reasons. One, governments are definitely going to ban this thing. I did a podcast somewhere around there where I was talking about it, listening to myself on a podcast talking about Bitcoin back then. Is like, Joel, shut up. Shut up. I said at the time, I said, I get the ideology, but there's no way government's going to allow this to happen. The second thing was, people do not understand gold at all. So how am I going to explain Bitcoin to them? There's just no way. So I was like, I'm not touching this. I'm not touching this. So I think, Jesus, Walker, I can't tell you, I made a wallet. I have the laptop. I made a wallet. Bitcoin was trading at like $1 or $10. I don't remember. I think I'm mentally blocking it out at this point. I created a wallet. I did all this trouble. I was at work. We were going to have a meeting. I'm on my laptop, and like I was like, well, I will buy $1,000 and I'll get 1,000 of these Bitcoin things, whatever. And I'm entering my credit card information into this, and I'm like, nah, and I didn't do it. And a couple of years passed, and I'm on Twitter, and somebody said on Twitter, you know, this Bitcoin thing, you know, it trades kind of cleanly. I think it was Peter Brandt. He goes, it trades kind of cleanly. There's no like CEO. There's no like earnings report. There's no central bank intervention. It trades really cleanly. It's really supply demand. I'm like, yeah, I think he's right. And so I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to speculate on this. I think it was like $200 at that time. So I took a sliver of money, still a gold bug. I took a sliver of money, and I'm going to speculate on this thing. And I did, and I speculated on it. And it wasn't much money. And I bought it, and it went up, and it went up, and it went up, and it went up. And I'm like, wow, this is great. And then it went down, and it went down, and it went down, and it went down. I went, well, that was nice. I have to lock in these profits. So I did.
It's clearly over. Maybe it's going to zero after, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I thought, well, that was fun. So I sold it all, and I made a little bit of profit, and I thought that was fun. Yeah, and so then a bunch of things started happening. I'm always looking, I'm always poking and prodding. There was somebody who created a cryptocurrency that was a cryptocurrency, and it was backed by gold. I'm like, a cryptocurrency backed by gold. That's interesting. So I started researching that, and it's like I got the blockchain. So I spent all this time understanding the blockchain part of it, and I became more or less satisfied. I thought, okay, this makes sense. You get down to the very bottom of it, and it goes, and all this blockchain technology refers to the LBMA price of gold. And it hit me there. Why would we build the system of rules just to refer to the LBMA price of gold? I trusted the blockchain side. I don't trust the LBMA side. There's three things that we eventually need to talk about.
Yeah.
Why people don't understand Bitcoin. The dollar, Bitcoin, and gold. They're three different things. They're just three different system of rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being in gold was painful. It was incredibly painful. We know gold is manipulated. Why do we know gold is manipulated? Because they pled guilty to manipulating the price of gold.
Yep.
And they admitted to it. They said, we are guilty, but that's not going to stop them, right? So it's like, after a while, and again, we'll talk about why gold doesn't work, you know, because of the system of rules. But it's so like, I sort of like, at that point, I'm like, why are we going to all this trouble? Where it's like, I trust the blockchain, but I don't trust the LBMA price, right? And that was sort of like the first, like, The other thing was other people started saying things out loud that I was thinking to myself. And there was a bunch of names, and we can get into some of the stuff later about like Bitcoin versus everything else. And some of I probably have some different takes on all this stuff. I have some different takes on MMT and all this stuff. It was Rob Paul. And he started saying, you know, this thing doesn't have any counterparty risk. And the whole time I was thinking, this thing doesn't have any counterparty. And he started articulating what I was thinking. And at that time, you know, it's funny because it's like, if I say to people, I'm on a web series, like a web series is like, what the fuck does that mean? It's like it's like a web series and it was based on a video game using machinima, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, I also directed and produced like 260 national television commercials. I did like 95% of all the GameStop commercials. So if you ever saw a GameStop commercial,
I just saw that recently. I was like, holy shit, that's a fuckload of GameStop commercials.
We did a lot, we did a lot of that. Like, people have no idea the amount of stuff that we did at that company. It's funny because it's like in 2013, like, again, we were started before YouTube, right? And when YouTube came about, it was a big debate in the company as to whether or not we should even put our stuff on YouTube, because we're giving our IP to somebody else. It wasn't even owned by Google back then or whatever. So we were like, well, let's not put our stuff on YouTube. And so we waited years. And eventually when we did put our stuff on YouTube, it was only a little amount. But I think it got to be about 2013. And in 2013, we got to 1 billion views on YouTube. 1 billion.
Jesus.
And then in 2014, we did another 1 billion. So it took us like, I don't know, many years to get to 1 billion and 1 year to get to 2 billion. There was a day on
like
that.
The monetary supply. Like, it's basically like the supply of money. Like, just like, 1 billion for a while. And I mean, except like, just add a few zeros to it, right? And then you basically got the money supplied.
Oh boy.
Tracking. Yeah.
Oh boy. If only we could maintain that. But,
right.
so I came into some money-ish things, and I was poor for a very long time. I slept on a mattress on the floor. And I went from poor to being not so poor. I still slept on a mattress on the floor, but I did hit a point, and I want to be a little bit careful about, the timing of some of this or whatever. But like I did say, I'm putting 80% of my net worth into this thing. It reached this threshold with me where it's like I'm going to put 80% of my net worth, and I did. And that was good. So where the hell were we? I'm basically just talking the timeline. So yeah, I invested in that, and basically, I guess that's the end of that story. And I kind of basically, I mean, like the reason why people come on these podcasts and they go, this is not investment advice, is because, and none of this is investment advice, is because, the listener needs to understand, am I a saver? Am I an investor? Am I a speculator? Right? Or am I a combination of these three things? And nobody can tell the audience member what they are, right? I'm all three. Like, I'm a saver, I'm an investor, and I'm a speculator. I speculate. So, but it's like a mass majority of is Bitcoin, right? But I'll trade to like the 10% at the top, So, I mean, basically I think that's kind of the story. I think that's my history. I think, and it's and I mean, it's funny. Twitter has been so unbelievably interesting because at the end of the housing bubble, we went from a housing bubble to now we're in a bond bubble, right? And it's the same thing where it's like interest rates were falling and falling and falling. And again, I think it was around 2014 where we had negative interest rates, where it's like people don't understand how absolutely unfreaking believable negative interest rates are. Like, there's a chart that somebody posted of like interest rates going back to the time of Jesus. Because they have those records where it's like the interest rate on money is like 15%. And then like a couple hundred years ago, they have, records from the Bank of England. And so you still have that history going back hundreds of years. And it's like you could just see like, woof, it went negative, and it's like, it's like I have to stop and we have to say to ourselves when we're having this conversation, who is the audience, right? So it's like you have this podcast. And it's like, who is the audience of this podcast? So it's like, if your audience is like Bitcoiners, I'm not really saying anything that they don't already know, right? There's no real value in anything that I'm adding. If it's
debatable.
Well, but the game from, the thing is again, any time in my life where I'm trying to talk to people about finance, they are not interested. And I totally understand. So it's like, know your audience, but it's like I do, so who I don't know what the audience will want from this, but the point is, it's like you have to know your audience. So it's like I need to desperately try and craft this conversation to make it as practical and basic as possible. Like for somebody who doesn't know anything about Bitcoin, and this should be the goal. Like Michael Saylor, since joining the space, has added a tremendous amount of value. The thing that I think he added the most, and maybe this is a new to me, is like the cheerful and constructive thing. Because I am not cheerful and I am not constructive. I am a pain in the ass, and I'm an awful human being, and smell bad. But it's like I've been having this conversation for a long time, and I have even convinced people to get into Bitcoin. I've convinced a lot of people to get into Bitcoin, and this is a whole other conversation where it's like adoption, right? So it's like I need to do the best job that I can. Like if I'm talking about like government denominated debt, and people have no idea what I'm talking about. If I say the word interest rates, people are out.
Yeah.
People are out. And the main problem why people don't understand Bitcoin is because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Everything is contextual. Everything is contextual, right? So it's like their only understanding of Bitcoin, like you can look at the cross rate of the dollar to Bitcoin. You can say, look, it's up 10 million X from the beginning. You know, the free market is saying something that's the only context that you can give it. So you got to give it more context than that. And like that has been my struggle. I need more water. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Talk
What I would say is, first of all, you've just made this intro incredibly easy because my first question was going to be, who are you and how did you get here today? And you gave me the how did you get here today, but can you give me the who are you also? How
Walker,
do you
I've been
describe
asking
yourself?
myself who I am. I have no freaking idea who I am. I really don't know. That's too complicated of a question for me. It's like I've been in production most of my life. I've done like every form of production. Like I've been a PA, I've been an extra, I've been a stand-in, I've been an actor, I've been an executive producer, I've been a writer, I've been a director, I've held a lot of different hats. I'm very confused, Walker. And being poor has taught me to save. And like this is the whole thing. It's like when I'm talking Bitcoin to people, it's like I'm trying to say, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, but it's like I really am. We're trying to save people. And the people who the most interesting thing to me about Bitcoin is the top of the funnel. It is the people who know nothing about Bitcoin. That to me is the most interesting part of Bitcoin because in them is like the greatest change. And, the other thing about Bitcoin is like, it's not going to stop.
Right.
It's just not going to stop. Like the wind is at our back and it's a drum beat that's just going to keep on. The thing is I have to be careful because it's like, I only have a certain amount of things that I can talk about. I don't want to blow it all out the window, but it's like, it's adoption, right? The wind is at our back, and no matter what happens, like people don't understand how their car works. They still use their car because they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You don't have a choice. I love you all. You're going to have to figure out Bitcoin. It's not going away. You can tune out of this conversation, and 3 years later, it's still, the drumbeat is still going to be going on. And again, it's like I've had conversations with people talking them into Bitcoin, and it's like when you talk to people, like you are not going to go from like, I know nothing about Bitcoin to I'm invested. It's a process. I am a pain in the asshole. And unfortunately, the thing that's going to pull people into Bitcoin more than anything else, like Lynn Alden's a genius. And she said something. She said, don't tell people to buy Bitcoin. Teach them about Bitcoin, right? Teach them to learn. So that is the key. It's like, don't buy Bitcoin, learn Bitcoin. And even if it's like I'm buying GE stock, don't buy GE stock. Understand what you hold, because when you understand what you hold, when the storm comes, you will have conviction, right? You have got to have and again, I don't know of any other asset in which I can have higher conviction. So it's like, it just doesn't matter. But like these conversations with people, it's like I spent years with this guy talking Bitcoin. And again, the thing that pulled him in, which is the worst possible thing, it's like when Bitcoin hit 3,000 the last time, I was just going to start, I really like him, so I was just going to start beating on him. And I'm like, Bitcoin just crossed 3,000. Bitcoin crossed 4,000. Bitcoin crossed 5,000, 10,000, 15,000. Every day, like I just keep bugging him. But the problem is again, this is the worst possible way to bring somebody in, because finally at like 42,000, he's like, all right, I will buy the Bitcoin. At 42,000, and again, that's the problem, because what you do is you suck them into the top, because people will not buy at the bottom, they'll buy at the top, and then they got to go through the pain of the cycle, right?
Yep.
And so, and again, he goes, look, I bought Bitcoin. Look here, look on my phone, it's on Robinhood. It's like, you didn't buy Bitcoin.
At least Robinhood
like,
started letting you withdraw. Like they did start allowing withdrawals from there. At least there was that, because for a while that was purely like just fully paper Bitcoin, right? But at least you can withdraw now to their credit. I don't know
again,
if
it's
they
a
keep that open
process.
forever, but yeah.
It's
Right.
a process, for the people, right? It's a process where they're not going to go to 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. And so it's like, at least if they, he's on his way. It's like the Bitcoin ETFs. It's like Bitcoin is going to get adopted. How it gets adopted, we don't have a say. We don't have a say on how it's going to get adopted. It's going to get adopted. It's going to get adopted in ugly ways. It's like you just came from Nashville,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, I don't think Donald Trump understands Bitcoin at all. But
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. He doesn't have to understand Bitcoin. All he has to understand is just get out of the way.
Right.
Just get out of the way. Like we don't need it can be a treasure. It doesn't matter. Like we just need people to get out of the way, because even if he doesn't get out of the way, it's all about rate of change of adoption. That's it, right? So it's like I would just like to live long enough to see it, go where it's just let's make this as quick as possible, and let's keep this orderly, But that's like the dollar. We're gonna have to talk about the dollar. We're gonna have to start this conversation to try and teach people how this works, because this is gonna be long.
Yeah. But quick aside, you're jiggling a little bit on the monitor, which is fine. But if it's because I love gesticulations and I love pounding the desk, but if you can pound the desk slightly to the side of it, just I know I'm being a real stick in the mud here. I know.
No. You should have told me earlier. It's terrible. We have been getting a lot of earthquakes.
That must have been what it was. But I will, just so you know, Joel, this is a safe space for rants. This is a safe space for tangents, like a real safe space, not a bullshit safe space, like where everyone's feelings are respected. But rants are respected here.
It's funny because
I will never stop the middle of a rant ever. It goes against my principles. I
It's
can't.
funny
do it.
because you went from Lawrence Lepard to me, which is like your audience is in for big disappointment.
I had
You
Lynn
have great
Alden
guests, and you have me.
and Obi Nosu in the middle. No, but I wanted to talk to you for a while, Joel, because this is one of those beautiful things about the internet, where like I found, I think Carla was following you first. She's like this guy's like hilarious. Like Carla loves media production. She's far more skilled at it than I am, but so she was like knew of you and your kind of like career from that, and she was like, you got to follow this guy, and I followed you, and I was like, oh yeah, I like this guy's vibe, one thing leads to another, and I start a podcast, and I'm like, I want to have you on here.
Well, this is why I agreed to be on your podcast, is because of the videos you make, and I'm like, well, I feel like you feel kinsmanship with anyone who's like producing content like that, because you do a great job at it, because it's like funny and it's adds value, and that's great. That's I just cursed for 15 years.
I appreciate that. Carla was I was really just the pretty face or the ugly face, depending on the skit. But she was the one doing all of the actual final cut action, by her computer, just like moving closer and closer to the screen.
You guys are so good. You guys are so great.
She's been on sabbatical, since our son arrived. But she's been itching to get back into it a little bit.
Well, you're just going to figure out how to expand the cast.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, the kid doesn't even pay rent, so he may as well start, contributing a little bit on the content creation front. Like,
he could represent interest. He could represent interest rates.
Oh, there we go.
Because he's small.
Because he's little. But no, so okay. So you mentioned a couple things that I think is actually this is great. I mean, you're very easy to interview because you basically just structured the interview for me, which is fantastic. And you mentioned, talking about the idea of savings, right? And why that's actually important. And as far as audience for this, I named this podcast, quote, the Bitcoin podcast, and bought as many domains that said Bitcoin podcast as possible, so that I could try to be a top of the funnel search result for folks that are getting into Bitcoin. And so while there are a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners who are deep down the rabbit hole who listen to this, I know that there are also folks that come in. Like, I will send certain episodes to my friends who are still, learning about Bitcoin, or who, be like, I just talked to this person. I think you'd really like them. Why don't you check this episode out? Maybe this will just give you a little more perspective. So, because I agree with you, that top of the funnel is so important. That's what we tried to do with our content creation is, because not everybody wants to listen to as much as I do, a like 4-hour Michael Saylor dissertation. Like I find that fascinating. You find that fascinating. The average person, their attention span is like this. Like it is minuscule. It is tiny.
It's like
and you got to hook them.
It's like the tipping point, right? Where it's like advertising. It's like It's like the thing that's in your peripheral vision. It's like the thing that's in your peripheral vision. It's the thing you can't see. It's in your peripheral vision. Eventually, you're like, I got to look at this thing at the peripheral. That's the battle. The battle is just look at this thing.
Yeah,
that's the battle. It's just, and that's like the tipping point. Is just look at it. It's complicated, you know, because it's like the dollar.
Right. Well, okay. So here's the thing. Maybe this is a good place to start. And I know we've already started, but this is a good place to start with our starting again. When I think that a lot of the, let's say, angst, nihilism, general, just like malaise that people have in the world today is because they see all of the problems around them, right? They see all these different problems and they say, wow, this, rightly so, they say like, this is fucked. But the problem is that they don't have a solution they can see. All they can see are the problems, and they don't actually, they see the end result of the problems. They don't even see the root problem, which makes it even more difficult. So it's kind of like, I see all these shitty things happening. I've been told that there are political causes to this, that there are, that I should hate this other group of people because it's actually their fault. All these different things, they don't ever get back to the root of the problem. And when politicians propose solutions to the, quote, problems, they're Band-Aids, they're superficial. They're just something to put on there to say, yep, look, I did something. Please vote for me again. Please donate to me again. Let me be in charge because the other guy will literally end democracy as we know it, et cetera, et cetera. We've all heard the lines. But so in my mind, what I see is like to distill that down, the big problem for most folks is they don't understand the problem, which is our money is fundamentally fucked. And then even if they understand that, because there are a lot of people, I think people are waking up to that a little more. I think even though our inflation here in the United States is not nearly as bad as other places in the world, people are feeling the pain. Because in like price inflation is something that you see every time you fill up your gas tank, every time you go to the grocery store, it's right in front of you. You can't ignore it. And so then they at least start asking the right questions. Okay, why do we have all this? Why are prices going up, right? But even if they get there, even if they're somebody who's like a gold bug, who has not, Larry Lepard, speaking of him, he has done a great job of bridging that gold bug to Bitcoin or Gap, as you have as well. But a lot of people, even if they understand, okay, yeah, the dollar is a Ponzi scheme created by a cartel of, private bankers, they still may not see that there is a solution to this, and a very viable solution that has been around now for 15 years, which is Bitcoin. And the fact that they can't see that solution tends to lead people towards doom and gloom and nihilism and like, what's the point of all this? It's all just fucked. So maybe a good place for us to start is just, okay, how do you, as somebody, you have been on this earth more years than I have, I'm still, I like to think of myself as still a relatively young spring chicken, but I'm getting on there in years.
Just you wait. Yeah. Everything hurts on me, Walker.
Man, I like tweaked my back. I felt this is actually the first time I've like started to feel old, and I'm not even old, but I like tweaked my back trying to get the car seat out of the car, and I was like, wow. I've never like tweaked my back like this before, unless I was like playing sports and it was like an actual reason for tweaking. I was just like at the wrong angle trying to lever the car seat out. Like, okay, I digress. It was just like wow,
like in the 1980s, yeah. I did the freestyle BMX thing, which was like injury, broken. I broke all my toes. I broke my ankle. I broke everything. And then, but like you're young, so it's like 6 months later, you're like, I'm fine. And then you turn 50, you're like, oh, I remember every single injury I ever had. I feel all of them all at once.
Yeah, but yeah. So I digress and see. I'm going to go on tangents too here.
No, the thing is that like the conversation that you're having, like for the listener. Like somebody who doesn't understand, there's two things. It's like self-sacrifice and risk. So like when you go from the dollar to something else, it's like there's a perception of risk, and there's also self-sacrifice where it's like, dude, I don't even have money, and you expect me to like now I got to go into Bitcoin. I don't have money to invest in Bitcoin, and it's like you can't afford not to. Like you got to get rid of stuff and save in Bitcoin, and again, that's like the whole adoption thing where there's a bunch of rules after you've made that decision that we'll have to get into, but it's like, I want to just try and be as practical about this as possible.
Yeah.
Let's talk about let's. This is gonna be a struggle for me, but it's like let's talk about the dollar,
Yep.
right? The dollar is not a thing, right? The dollar is the byproduct of a system. The dollar isn't a thing. The dollar is a process, right? And that process can go one of two ways. Either way, the dollar is trying to destroy the dollar. So in other words, you can print out a dollar and you can take that dollar and you put it under your mattress and like, no one can steal from me. No, they can still steal from you because you put the dollar under your mattress and 4 years later, as like 4 years ago, we've had 25% inflation. So if you took those dollars 4 years ago and you put them in your mattress, 25% of that was stolen from you. Well, what's the difference between currency and money? The difference between currency and money is that money retains its value over time. Currency loses its value over time. What is the dollar? Where do dollars come from? Like in 2014, 70% of non-primary dealership loan creation is where dollars came from. Now it's 2024, so now like 80 to 95%. What am I saying? So dollars come, when you go to the bank and you take a loan, dollars spring into existence. If you default or you pay off the loan, those dollars disappear. How does fractional reserve banking work, right? You get your paycheck, you take your dollars, you put it into the bank. They have a 10% reserve requirement, which means they're not your dollars legally anymore, but we'll forget that. They hold 10% and then they loan out the other 90%. And then those dollars go to another bank where then they keep 10% and they loan out the other 9%. And then it's turtles all the way down. Yeah. So it's like leverage. The dollar is leverage. What backs the dollar? It's like people have the idea that like taxes pay for our government. Taxes do not pay for our government. What backs the dollar? The bond market backs the dollar. What's the bond market? It's people giving our government money, borrowing money for a return, right? The dollar isn't money. The dollar, you could maybe say, is currency, but the dollar is a debt instrument. You can't own a whole dollar. The value of your dollar that you have in your wallet is contingent upon the fact of more and more people, corporations, and governments getting into more and more debt forever. Now, what happens when that debt is due? They don't have the money. Nobody has the money. It's like if you have a credit card bill and you have no money, you get another credit card and you pay that credit card. It's all debt. It's all leverage, right? So it's like there is no money in this scenario. It's all debt. Man, my voice is so dry.
You're okay. No, I think you're bringing up an amazing point because people tend to think of dollars as literally these pieces of paper that like it's money, right? I can buy stuff with it. But this system is literally just debt. You remove all the debt in the system, there are no dollars.
I think it's
all debt creation.
I think that they think that it's a piece of paper, but the government backs it. So
Right.
It's fine. And then they have recency bias where it's like, well, the last 10 years have been fine, so the next 10 years will be fine.
Yep.
It's like once you give someone a framework of this debt process, and I said there's two ways that this can go, I think where people are also running into confusion, the reason why they don't understand why this context is significant is that you have to understand what happens in a deflationary collapse, right? So like the Great Depression was a deflationary collapse. 2008 was a deflationary collapse, right? So it's like you have to understand what happens in a deflationary collapse. So in other words, since the entire system is a bunch of nodes that don't have the money, they're all reliant on other nodes to give them this process. Is that when a node goes down, it's like, oh, our business has collapsed. Boom, all that money that they were going to pay to other people is gone. And then now this node's like, oh, I don't have, then now the marginal difference is I don't have the money, poof, it disappears. And deflation spreads like wildfire. And in a deflationary collapse, there is a tipping point, and nobody knows where that tipping point is. But there's a tipping point where once you reach that tipping point, the entire system collapses. Like you saw this play out in 2007, 2008, where it's like, we need to get liquidity going. We need to get liquidity going. Because it's like they understood that it's like they got, well, but what does that mean? People don't understand right? Where it's like if you have your money at the bank and your bank goes under, people are like, whatever, there's FDIC. And they don't understand that like FDIC pays for 0.0000000. Like the FDIC doesn't have the money. But even if the FDIC did have the money, like what is this process going to look like? So you, like 2008, right? You go through a deflationary collapse, like Bear Stearns fails, and the people at the government are like, oh, Bear Stearns collapse. Okay, well, they're just like, well, whatever. Whatever. And eventually, like, none of the politicians understand it. But like Hank Paulson, who was the Goldman Sachs CEO before, he understands it. Like there's like he was in the hallways throwing up, right? Because he understood the problem, right? And so it's like he understands the problem. So it's like at some point he's got to convince the politicians, and he's got to have this conversation where it's like, yeah, the banking system is worth like, $18 gazillion. So I need $18 gazillion. And we're like, oh, okay, you need $18 gazillion. And so they got to have a conversation. And it's like, okay, well, let's go to Congress. And so we go to Congress. It's like, yeah, guys, we need $18 gazillion to bank out, to bail out everyone. And the politicians are like, you need $18 gazillion to bail out. Meanwhile, the bond market and the currency markets are watching this and like, the differential of time that it takes from like this deflationary collapse, it's spreading like wildfire. Well, they're like, we don't know. And is it going to hit that tipping point? There's a tipping point where there's no going back, right? So it's like, eventually they're like, okay, $18 gazillion. So let's say that they now write a check to $18 gazillion, and it's like 2 months later, and they're like, hey, everyone, no problem. We'll just put everything back the way it was. It's fine. Well, all these nodes and all those associations are not the same anymore. So it's like the bond market is watching this, the currency market. At some point, there's people watching this going, well, they're just going to like print $18 quadrillion. Like what is, you talk about the cotillion effect. You talked about the cotillion effect on the last one. What is the cotillion effect? The cotillion effect is a hot chocolate. Okay? So it's like you have chocolate powder. You put the chocolate powder in the glass. That chocolate powder represents the actual value in an economy. Now that can change, right? There's like someone creates a bridge, someone creates an algorithm. So it's a certain amount of value. Maybe it's changing, but it's not changing to the denominator. What's the denominator? It's the water. So we're going to take this value and we're going to denominate it by water. And we're going to dilute it. That's fine. It's a certain set. But what's a cotillion effect? The people closest to the hot chocolate take a drink of the hot chocolate, like, chocolatey. And now I'm going to add a cup of water. And then they pass it to the next person. And the next person goes, not quite as chocolatey. And so like every person has to pour a cup of water into the top. Eventually you get to the end, the last person in line is like, well, this is just water. So it's like that value of the hot chocolate is denominated in the water, but you keep increasing the water. The water is $1, right? So what am I saying with this whole deflationary thing? Like, well, you understand the system's leverage. You understand the deflationary collapse. Like, people don't understand. It's like, well, we need to balance the budget. That's not the way it works. There is no balancing the budget. We crossed the Rubicon in 2008. The dollar is binary. It's a 1 or a 0. We have to increase it. The national debt doubles about every 7 years. That's not for no reason. It has to. It has to. You must keep devaluing dollars, because if you don't, you will get a deflationary collapse. What is the dollar backed by? It's backed by debt. Debt must expand. Debt and credit are the same thing. It must expand. It must expand. If you go sideways, there's no sideways. It collapses. So somewhere in that, it can like expand this much or it can expand. No, listen, these are giant systems, right? So this stuff can go for years and years and years. You can have like some deflation over a year or two or whatever, but you better not F around too much, right? You must keep increasing the dollar. I was a libertarian. Back when Ross Perot was like, we have to balance a budget or we're going to be completely fucked and our children are going to be angry at us. And I was like, yeah. Like if you run a household, you understand that. That's Austrian economics. In 2008, it's over now. There's no going back. There's no balancing the budget, right? We have to keep this orderly. If you suppress the expansion of dollars, you're going to go into a deflationary collapse. So in order to keep this orderly, and things from collapsing overnight, you have to keep printing more and more and more dollars. There's no choice. And every central bank in the world knows this. They all know this. This is not, no one is hiding. If I talk about the dollar or deflation, no one's hiding the ball. This is not conspiracy theory. It's all there. This is not rocket science, right? So when you understand that they have no choice, again, let's make this very simple. Supply and demand, right? The more you increase the supply of something, the less it's going to be worth. So they have to keep increasing the supply of dollars. There's no choice. There's no choice. So that's the dollar, right? So I think that provides there's no choice. So it's like now there's Bitcoin, right? Now you understand the dollar. Now there's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is different than everything else.
Bitcoin is indeed different from everything else because you can actually own your Bitcoin if you hold the keys. Plus, no one can print more Bitcoin out of thin air like they can with the dollar, every other fiat currency, and every single other shitcoin out there on the market. So, you better keep that Bitcoin safe, and the best way to do that is to go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker for 5% off the fully open source Bitcoin only BitBox02 hardware wallet. Then get your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own self-custody. You may have seen people talking about this dark Skippy attack lately on X, which is basically a way for a malicious signing device to leak your private keys, which is quite scary. But luckily, Bitbox is one of the only 2 wallets to actually address this vulnerability. So you are in luck. Plus, the BitBox02 is just easy as hell to use, and that's the same whether you're brand new to Bitcoin and it's your very first hardware wallet, or you are a seasoned psychopath and it's like your 69th. And again, it is fully open source. You can head to their GitHub and you can verify that for yourself. There's no need to trust me or to trust Bitbox. When you go to bitbox.swiss/Walker and use the promo code Walker, not only do you get 5% off, but you also help support this fucking podcast. So thank you.
I want to provide some context for this. Like, I'm going to say some things that people aren't going to like, right? It's like,
I'm here for it.
Okay, so like 98% of the crypto market is garbage. It is
Yes.
scams. But I don't know what Bitcoin maximalist means. I understand that Bitcoin is different than everything else. Bitcoin is different than the dollar. It's different than Ethereum. It's different than everything else. Now, just because Bitcoin exists doesn't mean that Amazon stock doesn't exist. Like, we can go into Bitcoin hyper.
Bitcoinization.
Thank you.
Yeah,
See,
there
you're
you go.
there for you got.
I got
so
you,
we
man.
could go
I
into
got
that.
you.
There's still going to be investment. If we go into a hard money economy,
Yeah.
there will still be investment, right? So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, just because Bitcoin exists doesn't mean that Amazon doesn't, right? I think the problem is that we're all facing is that it's a battle for the normies, right? Where it's like, we're all battling for the normies. And so it's like the normie, and again, my frustrated process of like Bitcoin. It's like, hey, Joel, I bought some Doge. It's like, no, don't buy Doge. So it's like, because they think that it's cryptocurrencies, it's the same thing. It is not, right? Cryptocurrencies are divided. Every single company, it's like you have a technology sector. Every company in the S&P 500 is a technology company. A ketchup company is a technology company. A company that produces yogurt, back when they were able to homogenize the same thing. It's all technology. Every company is a technology company. So Ethereum and Bitcoin are completely different, right? I'm not against Ethereum. I'm not against Solana. You just need to understand that Bitcoin is at least money. It's digital property. It's at least digital property. It's money. There is nothing else that is money.
Yeah.
There's nothing else is money. Ethereum is a currency. It's a smart utility. Solana is a smart utility. Bitcoin is proof of work. Ethereum is proof of stake. Totally different, right? So we can get into that conversation later, but let's talk about Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin different, right? What backs the dollar? Debt backs the dollar. The ever expanding, it must expand. Bitcoin, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. That is the monetary policy. The monetary policy is set. It's not going to change. Nothing else is like that. I get a little frustrated because I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but it's like I remember the block size wars, and I understood perfectly because, again, like I get frustrated with people who come to Bitcoin through technology and don't understand economics, because I don't think that some of them understand what they have. They do not understand what they have. There is nothing like Bitcoin. There is no other cryptocurrency, and there will never ever be anything that is like Bitcoin, because people think it's a technology. That's not it, right? It's like, what backs Bitcoin? Proof of work, math, energy, hardware, the network, right? This is a massive difference, right? And the monetary policy won't change. You do not get a Bitcoin out of thin air. You have got to, you got to buy a hardware miner, you know, and you got to solve some math equations. You got to pay for the energy. It doesn't come out of anywhere. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. Go to an exchange. There's a free market price for it. You can buy it. I've never mined Bitcoin. I've just bought it. And that can't change, right? So it's like, I hope I'm serving, like, if you think of like crypto technology, right? It's like if your bank has like a way to protect your money in your bank account using cryptography, right? It's all software based. Yeah. It's all software based, right? So it's like, but it can be defeated. Bitcoin is different because it's there's cryptography, but it's also the hardware. If you think about the microchips in your bank, you running this cryptography, Bitcoin is a macro chip, which I'm stealing from Jason Lowery. It's a macro chip. It's one massive giant chip. It is the biggest computer processing chip on the face of the planet. Back when I didn't want to do Bitcoin because I thought the government could stop it, they could have stopped it. So I was like, governments can stop this. There's something called the 51% attack, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what you need is you need 51% processing power over the network in order to defeat the network, and then you can split the chain. Now, even if you split the chain, there's still some defense there, but it's like back then it was possible. Now it's not possible. Like you're not going to find a sword. It's just not. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. I have to think about this for a second.
Well, yeah, as you were saying, I think that just one thing to add on there is that what I love about even at that time, like let's say back in Bitcoin's earlier years in its quote infancy, the fascinating thing to me about the game theory of Bitcoin is that even at that time, let's say the government, the United States, for example, were to acquire 51% of the hash power. And try, we've got it, guys. We've got 51% of the hash power. This attack to maintain this 51% of the hash power costs us real world energy. So there's a cost associated with that. Even if we're just printing dollars to fund this, like there are downstream, second and third order effects of that. But okay, we've got this hash power. Now, wait a minute. Do we really want to reorg the blockchain and somehow destroy the value of Bitcoin? Well, no, actually, we've got all this hash power. What if we just mine the Bitcoin? Because that's worth more to us than, so hold on, guys, maybe we'll just keep this going. Maybe this, we don't want this thing to stop because we are literally just mining the hardest money and scarcest money that humanity's ever discovered. And that always I love that part of it. It's brilliant.
You're absolutely right. And it's like, but like I try not to go too far down the path because I'm trying to read this as simple as possible.
Yeah, I know.
I don't even know that I am making this as simple as possible, but it's like,
Joel, I think you are. I think you are, and I've got to say again, you are a pleasure to interview here because you've structured this better than I had going into it, and so I like it.
I've been thinking about this a long time. I want to make this point. I want to make this point, right? Do it. So it's like, why is Bitcoin different than everything else, right? So it's like, it's open source software, right? So you can take Bitcoin's code and you can literally copy it and you can call it Walker Coin. And you can even have enough followers where it's like, hey guys, this is exactly Bitcoin. It's exactly the same thing as Bitcoin. I just copied the code. It's Walker Coin. Same rules. And let's say people even actually start to follow you. Right? We're like, I like this Walker coin. They start to pile on. The reason why you can only do this once with Bitcoin is because now people see what Bitcoin is and can be, and now you will get a 51% attack, right? Where it's like with Bitcoin, that is not going to happen, right? Bitcoin was a one-time. Bitcoin is like this weird thing because it's like it's a system of rules. It's a voluntary system of rules. It's like math, right? But it's like math that is reinforced in the real world. It's the only thing that crosses from like the theoretical idea of morality into real world rules. It's like you have religion, you have law. Like religion is like, don't break the rules. You can still break the rules. Like, what are they going to use to enforce it? Well, we have people and we'll beat you. Same thing with law or everything else, right? So it's like everything else has rules, but the rules can be broken. Bitcoin, the rules can't be broken. That's a huge fucking deal. Like, this is the first time ever where, like, the rules can't be broken. Like, it's like people, like, it's like, what's the difference between barter and money? It's like if I ask people, hey, do you want to use barter or do you want to use money? They're like, well, let's use money. Well, it's a better idea, right? And so it's like the differential from barter to money, from, like, currency to action. We've never had money before. We've had currency. Let's talk about gold, right? What, like, because if the whole time you're thinking, well, like, gold is money. Well, gold was the best thing that we had before money. Why does gold not work? And we have like 5,000 years of this. And I used to be a gold bug. The problem with how much gold is at Fort Knox? You'll never know.
Debatable.
You'll never know. You'll never know how much gold is sitting under like the New York Fed at J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. How much gold there? You can kind of find some paperwork that you can kind of figure that out. You can kind of figure out how much gold is under there. And you can even go take a tour and see the gold. Hey, there's the gold. You can see it. Like there's the Goldman Sachs vault. That gold is never leaving that vault. That gold is never leaving that vault. Now, and they can hold up a gold bar and go, see, it's here. Then you ask the question, well, how many people own that bar of gold? 45 different people own this bar of gold. So it's rehypothecated. It's fiat. Because nobody's getting that fucking gold out of there. Because gold is physical, it has to be stored and centralized. And the people who centralize the gold are human beings. And because they're human beings, you cannot fucking trust them. Well, how do we know this? We have 5,000 years of history of people doing this. You can go back to Rome, it's like, well, what did Rome do? Well, they debased the gold. I mean, it's endless, right? So it's like, gold's fiat.
Or in its use, it's fiat. Let's in the way that it is actually used as money, it ends up transitioning to fiat. In itself, it's just a fucking chunk of metal, right?
It's a chunk of metal that you have no idea what the supply is.
Yeah.
You have no idea what the supply is.
No,
and the mechanism to price it is broken. You can have a physical gold coin in your hand, and in a deflationary collapse, you will win. If you have a physical piece of gold in your hand during a deflationary collapse, or Bitcoin on a self-hosted wallet, or even physical dollars during a deflationary collapse, you win, right? In a deflationary collapse, the price of Bitcoin will collapse. The price of Bitcoin in dollars will collapse, but you win. Why? Because everything else is going to collapse more, right? So that car that used to cost $50,000 is going to fall more than the Bitcoin, the gold, or the dollar, right? In a deflationary collapse. Like that's the reason why gold and Bitcoin, like I said, there's two processes, right? The dollar either ends in hyperinflation or deflationary collapse. There's no other way. Those are the rules of the dollar. I didn't write it. Bitcoin's not killing the dollar. The dollar's killing the dollar. Like, we don't know the timing. I mean, I'm not saying that, like, I really genuinely do think that, I don't think we're going into hyperinflation anytime soon. I really don't. I think we've got plenty of time. But, like, get Bitcoin now and, you make some money. Like, no one can tell you the amount of Bitcoin to own, but 0 is the wrong amount, right? Get off, like Pompliano, brilliant quote, get off of 0. So... Again, that's the thing. What I miss there? Like, I'm trying to think, like, what questions am I gonna get? Like,
I think that one of the things that people like let's say I know a lot of guys just from college. They're my dear friends, and a lot of them work in like high level corporate finance, and do very well. And so like we're structuring this right now to like let's say a more Western quote Western whatever audience, people that probably have some sort of disposable income, or at least could have the ability to cut certain things out of their current budget that they really don't need, that they can then use that excess purchasing power to acquire Bitcoin. Like they have the choice to make. We're not talking about people who are living in hand to mouth that truly don't have the choice to make, that are actually using Bitcoin as more a medium of exchange. So just to set that bar there. But I think that the pushback that I see a lot when I talk to my friends is like, okay, like I get it. Even if they they get the okay, yeah, there's only going to be 21 million, neat. First of all, I think that absolute scarcity is really, really hard for people to understand, because there's nothing. The only thing that you can compare that to is maybe your time. Because
here's the thing.
Like it's hard to understand.
Here's the thing, right? Human beings, in our reality, it's kind of a game of quantifying things, right? Like, what is the thing that I can do to quantify something? Like a million people have used like the dollar as a ruler, that it doesn't work because the ruler keeps changing, right? And so it's a game of like, how do I quantify things the most accurately? There's no other way to quantify something more accurately than Bitcoin. Like at the core of all of this is truth, right? Like at the core of all of this is truth. Like I have a pinned tweet on my Twitter that I've had there for years and years and years about a brilliant guy who deals with volatility, and basically what he's saying in that tweet is, you must seek truth. If you don't seek truth and you're blind to something, that thing that you think is okay that you're blind to will fucking destroy you if you don't pay attention to it. Like, you must keep recalculating truth. I mean, this is like this is what human beings do, right? It's like, what is your brain? Like, I used to think that your brain was a thing that made meaning. That's wrong. Your brain is not a thing that makes meaning. Your brain is the thing that detects meaning. Well, how do I know that? Because your iPhone works, right? It's like the concept of math. Hey, it fucking works. My phone works. Like, that's using math. If the math didn't work, your iPhone's not going to work. If you build a company making phones where you're like, I'm just going to use whatever math I want, it's not going to work, right? So it's like at the core of it, it's truth. And you must keep searching for truth. And Bitcoin is that unrelenting tool that will help you see truth. Oh my God, it is unbelievable how Bitcoin manifests itself. We've been in some threads together where we have seen some money managers, people that handle other people's money, not understand divisibility. We have people that handles other people's money, and it's like they don't know how math or fractions work, and they handle other, like, you're on the internet tweeting and people could read what you're tweeting. Like, they go, well, the supply of Bitcoin is infinite because it's really divisible. It's like, the tweet that you had with the fish, you got to repeat that tweet.
Yeah, okay. So for anybody listening that's not familiar with the context of what Joel and I are discussing, there have been several folks on Twitter, the platform formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, that have made the claim that Bitcoin is not in fact scarce because it can be, each Bitcoin is divided into 100 million Satoshis. And actually, if we're going to get technical, Bitcoin doesn't exist. Only Satoshis exist. And do Satoshis even exist? But okay, we won't get into that. But let's just say, for the sake of their argument, they're saying, well, Bitcoin doesn't. It's not scarce. You can divide it into 100 million Satoshis, and you could divide those even more. And like the analogy I use is like, oh, okay, you give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, but if you cut a fish into in infinite pieces, he'll eat for infinite days, which is obviously not true. Anyone with a brain knows this, but this is just like, this is fractions.
Dude, you can use a pizza.
That
was a brilliant tweet.
But it blows my mind. You're right. We're talking about, in one of these cases, we're talking about a person who literally sells a $699 like stock trading money management course. It's like $699 like a month or maybe a year.
There has been a bunch of people. There's been a bunch of
insane,
people
though.
who've fallen into that trap. It's like when they fall into that
I'm
trap.
gonna
It's
keep
like
talking about fish. Yeah, like it's okay. I got the tweet ready. I
well,
already
again,
know what
it's
to
like
say.
if you're a critical thinker and you're searching for truth, and this person, like they have made minus 10% this year, and they're trying to, and like there's like you're gone. You're
Well,
gone.
and so that I think that's actually a really important point, Joel, is that this idea that so many people come and look at Bitcoin and they're bringing their baggage with them. They're not looking at it with an open mind to say, and this goes for people who are incredibly well off, who are money managers, infinite fish or pizza ladies, or men, infinite pizza men too. It goes both ways with the sexes here. And it goes for people that are just trying to get by in their day-to-day life, right? That are just scraping by, trying to make rent, trying to make their mortgage payment, trying to, take care of their kids. It goes for people all up and down the spectrum. And it's this idea that you bring your baggage in with you, and you take all these preconceived notions. Like it's that quote, I forget who said it, but like Bitcoin is everything you don't understand about money combined with everything you don't understand about computer science, like et cetera, et cetera. And it's so true. You have to go in humble. If you're listening to this right now, you've stumbled across Joel and I going at it here, and you're like, what the fuck are these Bitcoin psychopaths talking about? I encourage you to approach this with a really open mind and be very humble, because that is the only way you're going to come to understand even a little bit.
The thing is that questions are good.
Yes.
Like I promise you.
Yes.
Like I've spent a decade and a half questioning Bitcoin, and no, even if it's not Bitcoin, if it's a Walmart, if I'm invested in Walmart, I am looking for every anti-Walmart narrative I can find.
Yeah.
If you're invested in something, you had better be looking at people who are arguing the other side. You have to. And I've been looking and looking. I just have not, like the two best arguments. I mean, I don't even want to say them. The two best arguments the two best arguments I've heard against Bitcoin. And again, guys, it's like I'm new to Bitcoin. I've been here for 5 minutes. Let me tell you what's wrong. If you have questions, ask the questions, learn. Believe me, whatever question you have, it has been answered. But I'll tell you, the two counter arguments I've heard to Bitcoin are the best are central banks could reverse policy and adopt a gold standard. Now, that wouldn't be as good as Bitcoin.
Right.
They could, but people are muscle memory and like already worship the central banks, and so they'll just go with it, but like central banks are not going to do that.
No,
they're not going to do that.
It already failed. Like it already failed, and it failed for a reason, right? They couldn't sustain it.
Well, they are not. The thing is that what the big political thing that people don't understand is with the current system, it's like they get to steal money forever. They get to steal value if the system works, as long as people keep using the system. Like if you want to rob someone, you want to do it where you're robbing them forever and they don't know. Like that's how to steal from people.
It's the ultimate con. It's the ultimate con.
It's the best way. Like they don't understand they're being stolen from. It's frustrating. Like you see all the people who are like, I can't ever afford a house. Like I'm not going to have money for food. It's it's depressing. But the drumbeat's going to keep going. Right. And so it's like as they keep coming up, we need to just be here beating the drum and, whatever gateway we can get them to turn their head. It's like I follow like a lot of street artists who just like put Bitcoin stuff down. Yeah. I like that just because it's just like it's still here, guys. It's still here. At some point, once people start looking at it, once they actually look at it, they're going to go, then it's over. Right. And it's like there is going to be definitely a tipping point because it's like to the point where like you can't afford to not look at it. And that will happen. And it's like the adoption with money managers and the Basel accounting rule changes and what Saylor's doing. And like look at the conversations we're having now. There is going to be a tipping point, and it will be better if you're in before the tipping point.
Right. It's if you're in before the chasm is crossed, right? If you're looking at that that adoption curve, and there's the there's the chasm in between.
Look,
the early adopters, like we still have not crossed that chasm yet. I do not think
I still think
we're
a
still
long time.
before. Yeah. Well, and you
we are way before.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something earlier that I hold on now. I need to remember it. You mentioned a lot of things, so now I'm trying to. And
Truth?
I love it. I love it though. No, it was around adoption. Oh, I think it was just you were talking about Trump, and specifically this idea that like, okay, whatever you think of Trump, whatever, and I think you and I are both in agreement here that he said buzzwords, right? Did you watched his speech, right? Yeah. First of all, I think the guy's hilarious. I think he's a natural born stand-up comic. Like it's incredible to watch him perform. He knows how to play a room.
I have mixed feelings about him.
I do too, and I trust a campaign promise about as much as I trust the U.S. dollar. So let me just put that out there. But what your point earlier was it doesn't matter if he understands it. It matters that he's just talking about it. And I agree with that. And I think that's that idea of the shift in the Overton window, right? The shift in what is actually publicly acceptable discourse in an election. I mean, that's wild. Like that we've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I think does actually have a much better grasp. Actually, he has heard him speak off the cuff, like no teleprompter, and he actually knows, like he knows his monetary history like none other. It's wild. But even Trump speaking off a teleprompter, saying the buzzwords that everyone wants to hear, it's great. Everything is good for Bitcoin, right? And this idea that you can't, at a certain point, you can't ignore it. And I think the one, for me, when I saw Trump speaking at the Bitcoin conference, it's like the most important thing about him going and speaking there is that just made Bitcoin impossible to ignore for a shitload of people who could really use Bitcoin in their life. And I'm not talking about, okay, for the big money managers, that moment actually already happened. It happened when BlackRock said, yeah, we're cool with this now. It happened when Larry Fink was going on CNBC and saying, yep, actually, like that was wild. But that was the moment for them. But for the average person, like that wasn't the moment for them. They weren't watching Larry Fink on CNBC. They weren't on Bitcoin Twitter. They are just living their life trying to get by. But maybe they watch every single Trump speech that he makes. And they did pay attention this time. And to me, that's the cool thing, is that maybe just moved the needle a lot for a huge swath of people who really could benefit from Bitcoin a incredible amount. And that's a hopeful thing for me, regardless of what happens in the election,
Absolutely. I mean, again, any catalyst that is just like, look over here, like just turn your head, just gets them to look, that could be the tipping point. It's so funny because it's just sort of like, for whatever reason, it's like you look at like the debate of like whether ETH was a security or not a security, and we went on for years. Like, is ETH a security? Like, and you look at the Howey test, is ETH a security? Is ETH not a security? Years and years. It's like, well, it checks all these boxes on the Howey test, so it is security. But it's like if everybody who's running ETH dies, ETH still exists, so maybe it's not a security. Debate. And what happened? Well, somebody just picked up the phone and was like, let's just approve the ETF. It was a political decision, right? So it's just sort of like, again, like that conversation is and again, like, Bitcoin's going to pull in a lot of other stuff, and it's like, I'm not against other stuff. Like, I'm not against smart contracts. I'm not against like technology. It just, none of it is like Bitcoin. It's none of it's money. Like, it's all currency and technology. Like, there's another conversation that's a little more complex, which I didn't even want to get into, but like I've been hammering this thing, like, again, when you go back to the block wars, where it was like the size of the block, and it's like these technology guys didn't understand what they had, where it was like they're trying to take money and turn it into a currency. It's like, if you fuck up Bitcoin and turn it into a currency, we're fucked.
Yeah.
Right. But there's another conversation with this where the technology of Bitcoin, like currency versus money, like there's a thing in the white paper, right, where it's like peer-to-peer, right? And that's a lot of us, we come from the libertarian side, so we tend to talk about the stealing through the central banks. But there's another layer to it, right? Where it's like, if you're using a peer-to-peer, like if I want to go buy a hat, Like it's like I'm gonna give cash to the guy who's making a hat. Like all my money goes to the guy making the hat. But if I use my Visa card, all of a sudden we got your bank and like hey guys, what are you doing? Can I take a piece of this? You know, it's like we have all these private companies trying to take a piece. So, but
and
like
storing all that data forever and then using it to sell you more stuff. But we don't. Yeah, I digress
but this is,
yet again.
No, but it's like I think people understand that instantly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a couple issues with like, you know, money can act as a currency. Like Bitcoin can act as a currency. Money can act as a currency, but currency can't act as money. Right. So, you know, if we get to Bitcoin hyperorganization, it will act as a currency. But there's a couple issues with that. You know, the Bitcoin scalability, I don't think is there yet. And it's like, I think it will come, right? The layer 2 stuff will come. So that will come, but it's like, again, in terms of this is almost why I didn't want to talk about it, because it's like I was trying to make this conversation as simple as possible. I want to make this conversation as simple as possible. And if people get lost in the currency side of it, they won't understand the money. And it's like they don't need, so it's like if we're trying to help adoption, it's like Monero, right? Like Monero is a cryptocurrency that's like private, right? Like, which is like probably a great thing, but it's like, because it's private, that's going to create a massive headwind for it.
Yeah.
That's going to create a massive headwind for it. And like the currency thing at the state of adoption that we're at right now, like, I don't know that I think it's good that it has it, but it's like, I don't know that we need to hammer that.
Well, so
like, I think we need to focus on the money side.
So I do want to get into that with you, but in the interest of, because I think you've set the stage really well in terms of the dollar and Bitcoin being very unique. And if it's cool with you, I would love to, because another thing you wanted to talk about was just the idea of savings. Let's talk about maybe that just a little bit more, and then we'll circle right back to this.
Can I get a glass of water?
Yeah, man. Again, this is.
I'll be right back.
Come on, I'm not a totalitarian
you're
here.
A slave driver.
Oh, come on now. I'm doing my best here, trying to make another fucking Bitcoin podcast.
You hear that?
Oh yeah, I can still hear you. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm already. I've been having a good time. This is good. This has been fantastic. But okay, so what I do want to get, I want to get into layers, because I actually like just having dug into a lot of the stuff that's happening right now on Lightning, on Fedimint with Federated eCash. There's a lot of really cool shit happening there. And I do want to talk about some of that and like trade-offs with that and other cryptocurrencies that claim to do these things in the base chain. But first,
I'm too dumb, Walker.
No, but it's okay.
I'm too dumb to have that conversation. But this is the part where you edit out the entire thing.
No,
too stupid.
I won't do it. But first,
I'm too stupid.
I want to talk about the idea of savings, because you brought this up right away. So I think you have done a very nice job of diagnosing the issue with the dollar, right? We are talking about
how is savings not a human right?
Well, then we get into the idea of natural rights. Now that's a whole nother rabbit hole. So the dollar is a system that is ultimately based on debt. It is controlled centrally. You've also identified that they have to keep printing this currency. And of course, they're not literally printing. They're on their keyboard. They're just adding some zeros to it. And they have to do that because the interest expense on the debt that they have issued is now what? It's like bigger than the military budget now at this point. Like we just crossed that bridge, right? Recently.
Yes.
Like it's insane. I mean,
it's a deeper issue than that, but yes.
Right. But the point is that the only way to deal with this is to inflate away that debt. Is to simplify it a lot for anyone listening. Then we talked about Bitcoin. And how Bitcoin is actually backed by proof of work. It is backed by real world energy. And some people, I'm sure, will debate the finer points. Well, it's not backed by energy. It's not. Okay. But just, again, to simplify things, you have to do work in the real world in order to discover these Bitcoins, right? You have to do it. And there's only going to be 21 million. And it is asymptotically approaching 21 million. It'll actually never get there, because every 4 years, the number of new Bitcoin issued per block is cut in half. So if you remember from your math days, guys, when you have an asymptote, it approaches a line, but it never quite touches it. It just gets, because if you get halfway closer to something, you can never get all the way there.
I don't think the human brain can understand exponential functions, so can they understand that?
That one I think is easier to understand than exponential function.
All right, good.
But now, so on a personal level, I was not great at saving. I had a very well-paying corporate job, working for one of the massive consulting firms. I got paid really well, but was just dog shit at saving, and was not like a good investor to the point where I was really digging into things and doing due diligence and trying. It's just like, oh, somebody told me about this. Well, I was really horseshit at savings, but the whole idea of savings, it didn't even seem that important to me, because I was like, well, I've got my company stock that I've got and they'll match it, and that's gonna go up, and I don't really need to worry about savings.
What's so funny right here is you can see the age difference between us.
And that's good though. We're bridging the gap here. We're bringing the age groups together. You're 19, I think.
I am 119.
Perfect. But no, what I was going to say is, it was not until Bitcoin that I understood both why saving is important, but also had a way to save that made sense to me. Because just putting dollars in the bank, or literally taking cash out of the bank and putting it under your mattress, as you identified earlier, you are still being stolen from. You are not maintaining your purchasing power if you are in cash. Now, it can be nice to have a cash position that's liquid.
Or if you have an inflationary collapse.
Right. So, Bitcoin takes a nice dip, and you can scoop up some cheap sats. Awesome. But I realized it was not until I started going down that Bitcoin rabbit hole that I realized, saving is something different than what I've been taught. First of all, it's so much more important than I at first realized. And now I actually have a way to save that makes sense. I just take my currency and I convert it into hard money, because I can still just easily go to any exchange and they will sell me Bitcoin in exchange for my dollars. And I just put that away, and I do a little bit at a time. I'm not, I didn't come in here with again, I told you I was a shitty saver. I wasn't coming in with but I got, 50 million in capital to deploy. No, dear God, just little, whatever's left over from every paycheck, that's going into Bitcoin, right? And that made sense to me. And I think that the reason a lot of people don't save is because even if they don't understand the technical details of why the money is broken, they understand that something's broken. And that's why so many people just put their money into indexes, right? It's just okay, just S&P 500, that's going to get me this return a year. But really all that's doing is basically just tracking the rate of monetary growth, right? Or the supply of money. And they probably don't even necessarily know that part of it, but it's hey, it's, numbers going up at a steady pace and it's reliable. But that didn't even make sense to me that much, because that's just that's treading water. That's keeping your mouth just above the water. So you're still breathing, you're still kind of swimming and flailing, but you're not dying yet. But if you're keeping your money all in cash, and people in countries that have experienced hyperinflation or structural adjustments overnight, they know this very well.
I have to articulate this in a different way.
Yeah,
I have to say this. A lot of this is process of getting rid of stuff, right? It's process
of elimination.
Process of elimination, right? Where it's just sort of where can I put my money, right? Where it's and again, we talked about it. Is it saving? Is it investment? Is it speculation, right? When we say, hey, there was a 25% inflation rate, if you're in the stock market and you have a company that is made 5% over the last 4 years, you lost money, right? So it's you have to subtract. So you can do the process of elimination. Okay, what can I buy, right? What used to be the bedrock of the financial system, right? Where it's U.S. triple rated bonds that yield 3%. But the name of the game of financial repression, the game that central banks are playing with you, is that they have to get that inflation above that. They have to get it. So it's okay, I'm going to put my money in this thing that yields 3%. There's a term in investing where it's the brass ring of investing is risk free, risk-free reward, and where like bonds are the opposite of that, where it's like it's all risk and no reward. Like you're guaranteed to lose. It's just a matter of how much. So it's like, where can you put your money, right? And this is this is why I went back to the 80s. This is why I said the thing at the very beginning, the Greenspan put and the credit expansion, right? We went from like the 70s to the 80s where the credit expansion really took root. Why? We were the reserve currency of the world, and we incrementally had the most capitalistic system in the world, and we already had the infrastructure from Bretton Woods too. You know, it's like, and by the way, like we went off the gold standard before 71. The banks made that call in the late 60s, which is like, people didn't even know that.
It was just official in 71 when
man.
they started to call our bluff. Charles de Gaulle
I got to say two things. One, it's like you got to do the process of elimination of like, where can I put my money? Can I put money in a car? No, that's not going to work. Can I put money in a house? Well, you're just running from the government. Can I put my money in bonds? Nope, you're going to lose. Can you put your money in stocks? Maybe you can win if you're good at this. If you're a speculator, you can, but most people can't. Like I follow a lot of people in the investment world, and I follow, it's like this war between Bitcoiners and everyone else, and it's like, I don't even know if I want to get into this, but it's just sort of like, maybe I won't get into this. But it's like this process of elimination. Where can you, like if you're listening to this, think through it yourself. Do you want to go to oil? Do you want to go to uranium? It's either you're going to I'm going to go to this company. Well, but companies are not as like great as you think they are. They don't last as long as you think they are. And if you do, I'm going to buy Apple. Okay, well, what's the PE of Apple? What's the PE like? It's like in the late 90s, why did we, like, people don't even understand PE ratios. Like in the late 90s, why did we know that it was a bubble? It's because like Oracle was trading at 80 times earnings, right? Like what's the average of earnings? It's like 15, 20. It's like, so it's like you're going to have to buy a stock that's unbelievably expensive. Now, again, you brought this up. It's like people subconsciously understand that they don't have a choice. So it's like muscle memory, where it's like, well, I'm just going to put my money in the market.
Yep.
I'm just going to put my money in the market. And if you divide the returns of the equity market by the Fed balance sheet, almost over, like since 2008, you've broken even.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
It's
and it's like,
water.
and again, everyone keeps denominating everything in dollars. If anytime anyone shows you a chart of anything denominated in dollars, it's like, well, how much value did the dollar lose during that time?
Right.
So it's process of elimination.
And I think that's such an important point, and this goes back to the idea of the measuring stick, right? Like the dollar is a really dog shit measuring stick because you don't know how long it is. You don't know what the units on that stick are. You don't know how long it is. You can look at certain metrics for it. Like you could look at money expansion and have some idea of it, but it's regardless. It's not a static measuring stick. It's not a static denominator. To your hot chocolate analogy,
it's like the unemployment rate doesn't measure unemployed people.
Right.
Well, let me tell you how the unemployment works. Right, you lose your job, you are unemployed. After 6 months, you don't find a job. You're still unemployed. According to the government, you're no longer unemployed.
Yeah, well,
because you got to look at labor force participation.
Well, and this is the problem with government metrics in general. Like if you think that inflation, if you're listening to this, and this is not to judge you, but if you think that CPI is measuring inflation, you are wrong. CPI is an ever-changing basket of goods, and of course, one can make the argument that yes, of course, that basket of goods should change. Consumer preferences change, but this is a cooked metric by the state.
In the 1990s, that was like the demographic top of the United States of America, and like under a lot of metrics, something they introduced called hedonics. And hedonics is basically like, we're going to make a subjective call on what this thing costs, right? So there was a website again, I'm old, so like there's a website back in the day called Shadow Stats. In Shadow Stats, what they did is they ran like the pre-hedonic numbers of inflation, like they ran it the way it used to be, and it's like, oh, look, inflation is way higher than what they're saying, right? So it's like, again, the reported number of inflation isn't accurate.
No, well, and see, the problem with you, Joel, is that you spark so many other rabbit holes in me that I want to go down. Like the idea of when politicians talk about inflation, quote inflation, they're not actually talking about inflation. They're talking about prices rising as a result of the inflation of the monetary base. But then, you know, a lot of people look at you and they're like, that's just some kooky Austrian shit. Like that's not real. Like, and so that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But to wrap up this this idea of savings, and I think that idea of process of elimination is a really good exercise for people to go through, to basically say, okay, consider Bitcoin amidst all the other things that you can invest in. And the purpose of investing is to be able to grow your purchasing power over time. But nobody really wants money, right? We don't actually want money. Money is a tool to be able to get the things that we want. That's what we want. And if that money is good money, sound money, then the longer that we hold that money, we should be able to purchase more of the things or higher quality of the things that we want in the future than we can right now. Delaying gratification should have its benefits. You know, MMTers may go a different route, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But
I can give you the case for MMT.
Well, yeah, give this case for MMT.
Okay, here's the case for MMT. We go into a deflationary environment. We go into a massively deflationary environment.
Okay.
Then AI happens, and it starts like 5-6 years from now, just starts eating everybody's jobs, and we have deflation. Maybe that's the case for MMT.
Okay. Well, so
but
that's
I'm not
yeah.
like I don't think that that's a good idea. Like I'm against MMT. But if you're listening to this podcast, you got everybody's on our side probably. But it's like, what's the counter argument? Maybe that's the counter.
Well, and I think that's a fair point actually. And this is something that I think Jeff Booth has done a great job of talking about. Just this idea that like he blows my mind. Also talk about cheerful and constructive. You know, he's one of those people who really embodies that. I try to live up to that. I almost always fall short. So shout out to Jeff.
You know, the problem with the Bitcoin space, Walker, is that it is infested with massively high IQ people. So it's like you've got Jeff Booth, like you have these people who are like freaking, like so freaking smart. Like Jeff Booth is like 12 steps ahead, like every time. So it's like I listen to him and I'm like, well, I'm never going to appear on a podcast because I cannot articulate what this guy is saying like so precisely. He wrote a book, Price of Tomorrow. It's really short. It's awesome.
It's
and basically he's just describing, like, you don't understand how insidious the system is because at the core of the actual economy and actual reality, it's deflationary. Like because of technology, because of demographics, because of the debt itself, it's deflationary. But it's like you have this central bank layer over it. Like that's another thing why I'm saying, well, the dollar supply has to keep expanding because as it gets more and more deflationary at the core, they have to print more and more money to fight that deflation because if they lose that deflation, the banking system and every company collapses, right?
Well,
so it's
exactly.
like, yeah. So,
this is my point was Jeff's, you know, his thesis basically, as you described, is okay. Technology is naturally deflationary. One, so everything should be getting cheaper, and you very easily know this. You look at a manufacturing assembly line right now versus 100 years ago. It is exponentially more efficient.
Dude,
like you don't even. It's insane, right? Like
they had a meeting. You're gonna love this. They had a meeting in the 70s. Talking about how we're going to run out of oil. And it's like, because again, it's like if you have the bear case on a stock, you can quantify things very easily. So they did the math of like, well, how much oil are we consuming? How much, blah, 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 we're going to run out of oil. And it's like, what they didn't understand is like, you know, we're going to invent the catalytic converter and all of a sudden we're going to get like 12 times the energy out of the same, like we're going to get like 40 times the amount of food out of a square foot of land. You know, it's like they didn't understand any of this stuff. Like we're going to discover oil in places that we didn't think we could get to before. So it's like a lot of the people that are arguing like inflation through natural market forces aren't understanding technology. It's
correct.
Massive.
And that's the thing is, okay, so we get back to this idea of, do they have to keep printing? And the answer is basically yes, they need to keep printing because if they allow technology to take its natural course, like tomorrow the Fed just decide, and every central bank in the world just says, okay, hands off, we're just leaving everything just the way it is. We're just not going to do anything, right? We're just going to let well, then prices are going to go down. Like prices will go down, but they cannot do this They cannot do this because, again, as you correctly identified earlier, our system is based on debt, and that debt has to continually be serviced. And the only way to do that and actually have the wheels keep turning is to keep debasing the currency. The other option that Jeff will also talk about is you reset it. You either have a debt jubilee, which is unlikely, or more likely, and which has happened many, many, many times throughout history, is you go to war. And you go to war and you use that as the way that you enter into this reset period. Like that's not the great reset, but that is a pretty damn good reset when it comes to clearing the pieces off the table and starting fresh. But those are your options.
There's a book that Jim Rickards wrote in 2010 called Currency Wars. And basically, like, currency wars lead to trade wars, lead to kinetic wars. And, what's a currency war? Like, a currency war is central banks competing against one another to try and create more inflation. It's a race to create more inflation because, like, this whole conversation, we're talking about something real. Like, we're talking about the cross rate between the dollar and Bitcoin, which is more real versus, like, the cross rate between the dollar and the yen, right? So where it's like, but, like, what that is a competition of central banks trying to fight each other, but, like, only one can do it because it's everything's in context. I had something so smart to say and I forgot what it was.
It'll come back to you in the fullness of time. It'll come back to you. But no, okay.
You know what it is?
It's
like there's a documentary called Princes of the Yen, which is a long documentary where it's like basically towards the end, you have this centralization that occurs where it's like oftentimes the Treasury and the central bank will start to merge. And you can also see this where it's like global central banks will start to merge, right? Where it's like the association between the Bank of Japan and the Bank of America, like they're starting to merge, right? Where it's like if you have a big problem with the central bank, they are going to throw you swap lines. They're going to do it's just sort of like, I try to keep these conversations as simple as possible where we talk about like even if you understand interest rates, like the cost of money and how like they will lower interest rates to create inflation. It's like, guys, like there's a Treasury general account. There's a way that they issue bonds. There's like the reverse repo facility. There are a lot of freaking things that they can do. So it's complicated, but like, again, oh God, I was going to tie this in. I'm lost.
Yeah.
This is why you got to have Jeff Booth on.
Oh, he's actually coming on next week, as a matter of fact.
Oh, great. So you got Lawrence Apard, me, and then Jeff Booth.
Yeah, well, Lynn Alden was thrown in there too. But you know what,
dude?
But I think I think you're at a perfect place in this position because
I'm a normal stupid person.
I'm a normal stupid person too. Most people are normal stupid people, right?
Listen, our funny videos are funnier than their funny videos.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Lynn Alden is like transcendently a genius.
Yeah, she's like, next level.
Like she's like I follow like 2,600 and it's all marketed. She's like number 2.
Yeah.
She's brilliant.
Yeah. It is a treat to drink from the fire hose of her knowledge, let's say. And it is, yeah, I wish that I could organize my own thoughts and have a fraction of that kind of brain power. She's, and then, this is the other thing for folks. It's like one of the things that gives me so much hope in just Bitcoin and the future to come is that some of the smartest people that I have ever met in my life are so fully invested. And I don't mean invested monetarily, but that also, but invested intellectually in Bitcoin.
I hate it.
But it's amazing too. Like it gives me so much hope. You see all these incredible people working on this, working around it, whether that be funding, through VC work, through actual development work, whatever it is. Like there's a reason that people of a certain intellectual curiosity naturally flock to Bitcoin. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier about truth, right? Because the curious, intelligent mind searches for truth. My Carla's dad.
If you don't, it will be if you don't, it'll be disaster.
Yeah, but Carla's dad always says to me, and this is coming from a guy who literally was a communist defector. And he always says, like, dubito ergo cogito, cogito ergo sum. I doubt, therefore I think therefore I am. If you are not doubting and asking questions, then you are not actually thinking, because if you're not asking questions, if you're not doubting,
questioning is a process of thinking.
That is the process of thinking, is asking questions either to yourself or externally. But that's how you find out what the truth is. And so now, again, we digress again, but I think that digressions and tangents are the spice of life. They're the spice melange, But okay, Joel, do you think have we covered the case for why the dollar is fucked and a made up, kind of insane system? And have we also covered why Bitcoin is something that, through process of elimination, the thinking man or woman can find their way to naturally, because when you do enough process of elimination, you realize it's the only thing left? Do you think, is there anything else we want to add to that?
Again, like, it's all a process of, like, if we can just get people to start thinking about it, maybe I said something wrong.
Yeah. I say stuff wrong all the time.
But it's like, check it, look at it, like, everybody check it. That's the thing about the internet, is like, everybody's checking each other, looking. It's a conversation that doesn't end. It's a more decentralized, it's just a conversation that doesn't end, and that's good. That's a good thing, right? So it's like, I'm sure I get things wrong all the time. And it's like, and again, in terms of the dollar thing, it's kind of a concept. It's like you got to like think about it, and I don't know, like, people just need to think about it. And if there's holes, if there's something, that's wrong, bring it up.
Yeah.
Like I said before, it's like, what's the counter argument to Bitcoin? Will they go on a gold standard, or like somebody uploads a picture of porn onto the Bitcoin chain and it's like,
oh no,
porn on the Bitcoin? That's,
oh no. Clearly we would shut down the internet immediately if there was porn on there. So obviously
it's so funny that if you know nothing about Bitcoin, like, it's just sort of like, Bitcoin, it's this made up thing. It's this made up thing. It's fine. So we're over here doing our made up thing, and all of a sudden the government's like, you do your made up thing. It's like, oh wait, you're making money at your made up thing? Okay, well, give us some of the money of your made up thing. And then, like, Elizabeth Warren's like, wait a minute, you were trying to memorize 12 words?
How dare you?
You cannot memorize 12 words. At some point, there's a neutral party in the middle who's looking at this, who doesn't understand the dollar, who doesn't understand Bitcoin, and they got to be thinking to themselves, well, Elizabeth Warren doesn't want people to be able to memorize 12 words or have bits fly across the internet. Like, wonder why.
Yeah. So, if you have a couple more minutes still. You
yes,
okay?
But I'm very stupid, so I don't know if I have anything smart to say.
You've said a lot that I really I appreciate, and I want to here, go ahead if you had something there.
Well, no, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's just like getting people to think.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hopefully, if we're just like, you're saying stuff, I'm like, oh, and it's we're both going, oh, like, maybe that's a good thing.
No, I wanted to. This is just it's a little bit of a different angle here. But you were mentioning earlier just like different layers of Bitcoin, and we don't even have to get into technicals of these. But one thing I actually was curious about: are you on Nostr yet, or Nostr?
I am on Nostr. Like, I joined it a while ago. I don't use it like at all, but I'm on there. I've kept a very low profile. Other than my Twitter account. It's funny because it's like, I feel like I follow so many people in the space. I feel like I have, relationships with them, and I feel like I've never met. It's funny. I worked with a client for like 15 years. I never met him. And it's just, so it's like, I feel like I have all these relationships through the internet. I love all these people, but I tend to lurk.
Lurking's cool. Like, I literally lurked on Bitcoin Twitter. Carl and I both did, until one day, like, it was like 2021, and this was after that first big, crash. And we were like, man, everybody's so sad, like, and so mopey. Like, this is like when we started just making stupid videos, because we're like, we gotta bring a little bit of levity in
Those
here. Like we
videos are so
got to
awesome.
bring some laughs in here. But the reason I was asking about Nostr is because I think that this is like, and I'm gonna now that I know you already have an npub and an nsec, you know, your username and password, but in the cryptographically signed kind of way, I'm going to start poking you to use it more because this is something that when I talked to Lynn, she described this in a really beautiful way that Nostr is basically like it adds a discovery ability, like a social discovery ability to Bitcoin wallets. So if it basically turns Bitcoin wallets into a much better Venmo. And like that, and that's just literally on the payment side. But then on
people have no idea what a big deal this is.
It's huge. Well, and the reason I ask you about this is because you guys were hosting your own content on the internet. You were like one of the, if not the longest running web series. In Korea, they call them Webtoons, right? But you guys were, what's the term for what you did? It's makin, what is it?
Machinima.
Yeah, which for anyone that doesn't know is you're using a video game basically to then create a story
using
around
real-time 3D rendering
Right.
engines to tell a story.
which is awesome. And like, but when you guys were doing this, you were hosting that yourselves. You were running on your website. This was pre-YouTube. Like
if I wrote a book about everything that had happened, no one would believe me. It's just there's so many totally, completely bananas things that have happened. You know, it's funny because it's like I'm so old that there was no internet, and then was Web 1, which was read, and then Web 2, which was read write, and thus was born comment sections where people can yell at you and tell you what a terrible person you are, and we had that or whatever. Now we're going to Web 3, which is ownership, which is like I just need one freaking password for all this stuff. One freaking
And Web3's become such a bastardized word too because of the quote
It is.
crypto space.
Yeah.
And I know like Dorsey is a big fan of the jump to Web 5, right? Like you're just fuck it, like just
It's
just
a
skip a few
subjective
levels.
term, kind of, which is not good.
But I appreciate the way in which you're using it, which would be the non-bastardized way. But the reason I bring up Nostr because to me this is like this idea of how the internet was kind of supposed to be. And this, because all it is a protocol, and it's a protocol that's being used for social media right now because it's like build what you know and build what you're familiar with, build what's going to bring users onto this protocol, which is social media. People want to be social. Most people are pro-social, even if they are heavily introverted. They can find a way to be pro-social online.
It's built into us.
And that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, it's a natural evolutionary mechanism for us to propagate our species, right? And again, the reason I bring this up is because as somebody who was so early in the content creation side of things on the internet, again, like pre-YouTube, which is just like for most folks like that if you talk to like a Gen Z person, they're like, what do you mean like pre-YouTube? Like what is it like? So like how long ago? Like what was that, like 1950? Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably not giving Gen Z enough credit. Maybe they know things better than I think. But like
I was wearing a Thrasher magazine T-shirt. People were like, "What's a magazine?"
What is that? Like an e-zine? Do they even? I don't know if they even use that kind of terminology anymore either. It's just people don't even say blog anymore. You notice that? It's like blog is like not really like that's just like it's my Substack or it's my Medium. It's like nobody's hosting their own blogs anymore.
It's funny what different generations pick up on.
Yeah. And I don't even know if I had a point with where I was going with this, but I'm going to poke you to use Nostr or Nostr.
I'm probably not going to go on to Nostr until Lynn Olin follows me on there.
Okay.
No
Well,
pressure.
I will.
No.
Now you put that out there. I'm gonna tag Lynn and be like, Joel said he's not going to start using it.
I made a mistake because like a long time ago she posted like something brilliant, and I posted "I love you," and people took that the wrong way. And it's like, and people are like, you're not supposed to love people. I don't know. And so it's like, oh, I hope I didn't cause a problem. I say, but she's smart, is what I was saying.
Well, no, and I think if people can't understand the nuance of a comment like that, then just
I cause trouble. I cause trouble.
That's good. That's just a good place for that. With everything going on in the UK right now, like I see this in like a quote Western country, and like all of these censorship laws that they've had on the books for a while that they're now really going to start enforcing. Like, did you see this stuff? I was just seeing this today about if you retweet something, so it's not even you publishing this, but if you retweet something, repost it on whatever platform you're using, and it goes against, or it can be deemed to go against their laws, there's a huge amount of subjectivity. You can get in trouble with the law. Like, you can be arrested. Like, this is insane.
Look, this is
nuts.
This is so horrifically bad that you really have to break this down into like two pieces, right? There's the people who realize this is horrifically bad, maybe three pieces. Then there's like people who are like, well, it's just going to be used in that instance, where it's like, if you remember the trucker thing up in Canada, like some good came from that because people were like, hey, this is not like, people will pick up on it. So maybe there's yin and yang where people realize this is going to it will get abused, right? If you haven't figured this out yet, it will absolutely positively get abused beyond what you can possibly imagine. There's a third category of people who are like, yeah, I'm for it. Like, if there's a person who's for it, that is such a long conversation you have to have with them.
Yeah.
That's going to be a hard, like, that's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
So I'm not equipped to have it.
It's a painful conversation to have too, where it's like, okay, that person is engaging in like really basic first order thinking. Like, they're just like, well, this is bad and I don't like it, so it shouldn't be there. Like, and then you've got to be like, oh, okay, wow, we've got a long road.
It's like, look at history. Like, it's like, just, I mean, look at history. Like all the concepts that we've talked about today, where it's like, they have to devalue the dollar. Look at history.
Yeah.
Look at how many, I don't even want to talk about how many, the statistics of, like, somebody tried to do the statistics of how many failed fiat currencies there had been, and they got all the way through the letter A, and they got halfway through the letter B, and that was 5,000 currencies. And they're like, well, I'm done. That's the history of the world, right? And again, like, if you can't figure out what we're saying, look at history.
Well, and that's the thing that I think is really important to understand, is that oftentimes when you find yourself in periods of intense social unrest, there was actually, let's call it, some monetary unrest that preceded that maybe you just weren't aware of. Like, you look at, as a prime example, like the French Revolution. It's like, well, why did they start guillotining people? Well, it's because they were systematically devaluing the French assignat, like, over and over and over again.
Like, again, in the search of, like, trying to quantify things as much as possible, that was something, like, I've looked at things acutely, but like a long time ago. And so it's like the conclusion of the French Revolution was, once you get to 10% of the population starving, they revolt.
Yeah.
Like, what, they start doing the math and they go, well, I'm going to die if I don't do something. And that's when that happens. Now it's like different now because, like, technology, like, hopefully will keep people fed longer, so I don't know, it's just, but, again, again, it's so complicated because people get stuck on the manifestation of politics. And it's like, this is why we're talking about economics, because, like, economics is in front of all this. Like, again, currency wars lead to trade wars, lead to kinetic wars. And it's like, or the fourth turning, right? Like, you have these demographic things. So it's like, there's these patterns, these cycles that you can look at. And it's like, well, this is, people get caught up in their own time. And, like, the solution to everything is you got to go deeper.
Yeah.
No matter how deep you're going, you got to go a little deeper. And like, the other problem with this is like, there's a base assumption on our part that if we have a conversation about this, it will help relieve it to some extent, and it may not at all, because some of these cycles are just going to play out. I mean, I think it's great to talk about. I think it's great for people to talk about and try and wrestle with and figure out. But it's again, part of it is just sort of like, here's the cycle. The cycle is going to play out. How do I position myself? You try and reason with people as best you can. It's a complicated world.
It is. And it's like, to the point of like, maybe there's nothing you can do about this cycle playing out, and it may be playing out in a slightly different time scale, because we've made such advances in technology that we've been able to hide so much of the underlying rot in the system. So much of it has been able to be obfuscated because technology has improved so much, and that just makes the amount that you can steal from people greater because they're not going to realize it because you're stealing from a negative point. It's naturally deflationary. You're stealing from that point. So just to get up to zero, you've already stolen some, but then you steal up to, 2%, the perfect inflation number that all central banks have agreed on, which is just the ideal amount of theft that you can get away with without causing riots in the streets.
It's funny, if you listen to a lot of conversations, people are like, how do they get to 2%? There actually is a reason. And I can't remember what it was. I think it's like because 2% is like a tenth of a percent of world. I can't remember this. Like if you listen to 90% of libertarian podcasts, like they will say what this 2% is arbitrary. There is not that it justifies the reason, but there is a reason. And I can't remember. It has to do with something. See, this is why you gotta have Jeff Booth on.
I know. I'm actually very curious. I'm wondering if ChatGPT knows the answer.
Oh well, I bet it doesn't.
It's going to be like,
why don't you check Wikipedia?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's see. So ChatGPT says the 2% inflation target is standard used by many central banks, including the Federal Reserve in the United States and the European Central Bank. This target has its roots in economic theory and historical context. Here's a brief overview. Okay, 1970s inflation crisis.
No, that's not
1980s disinflation. The 2% target emergence. Okay, New Zealand's example. In 1989, New Zealand was the first country to formally adopt an explicit inflation target, initially aiming for a range of 0 to 2%. The move was part of a broader shift toward greater transparency and accountability in monetary policy. Wasn't that nice? Adoption by other central banks. Following New Zealand, other central banks began adopting inflation targets. The Reserve Bank of Australia, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England were among the early adopters, each selecting targets in the 1 to 3 range.
No, there's a big problem with all this, right? Where it's just sort of like, again, it is so easy for people to get sucked into the wrong direction of how the world is presented to you versus how it really works. It's like for as long as I've been following this, there's always been like a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Now I think it's Tim. I don't remember his name. Tim. It starts with a T. But he's like a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and basically his job is the Fed comes to him and goes, "Hey, float this story." Like float. This is a tradition that's been going on since the 80s, right? And it's a trial balloon. Right, where it's just sort of like, put this out, just let's see how the market responds to it, right? Now, you're not going to find this on Wikipedia, but this is how the world works, right? Where there's a lot of subtlety. It's like, the Fed's not political. Well, yeah, the Fed is political. Like, the Fed's mandate is price stability. Well, look at a chart of the dollars. That stable prices? But it says on Wikipedia this price stability.
It says it right there.
Prices are not stable. So it's just sort of like, and some people aren't going to, understand any of this stuff. And so it's like, you got to drill down on everything, I mean, it's like, this is why you got to critically think. Not that I am helping that process at all.
I think so. I think if there's one thing folks can take away from this discussion today, it's that you, first of all, question everything that we've just said. And if you think we're full of shit, do your best to disprove it, because that's what you should do. Like, you shouldn't take everything that people say at complete face value and assume it to be the gospel truth. Like, you should search for the truth yourself. But doing your own research is apparently that might be its own conspiracy theory. So I don't know if you want to go down that road. You got to be careful. Like,
what were our 3 themes for this podcast? Our 3 themes for this podcast were savings, adoption, and heroin. So we covered all
how
of
did we
it.
get to the heroin? Wait, did we get to the heroin?
That's dollar. The dollar is heroin. Like the dollar is heroin because you've injected it. And then once you inject the heroin, you need more and more and more and more and more. And then it gets to a point where if you stop using the heroin, you're going to die. Right? So it's like, now we have to keep using the heroin. And then it gets to a point where you're going to die either way. Debt, credit, the dollar, it's heroin. I have one last story for you. We should wrap this up because people are going to this is very long.
If you've made it this far, though, thank you for sticking around.
I have one last story.
Let's hear it.
This is how poor I was. I had a call from my agent This is a long time ago. This is the 90s. I was very poor. I get a call from my agent on a Friday, and they go, "Hey, look, it says on your resume that you were a baseball player." I lied on my resume because I was poor. And this is what you're supposed to do if you're an actor. You lie on your resume. So I'm like, baseball player. And they're like, "Oh, so you were a baseball player? Where were you a baseball player?" I go, "In college." And they went, "Oh, okay. We're going to put you on hold for a second." So they put me on hold, and I'm on hold for like 7 minutes. And after 7 minutes, they pick up the phone and they go, "Okay, so you are catching Randy Johnson on Monday." For all those people who don't know who Randy Johnson is, he was that like 6'9", 7-time Cy Young winning like baseball pitcher who was like pitched 98 miles per hour. He was still in his career. Like this is during the night. This was the Diamondbacks. I had a picture.
Diamondbacks, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, I'm going to die. So I go to some batting cages, right? And the fastest batting cage I can find, it goes 85 miles per hour. So I go to this batting cage at 85 miles per hour. The ball goes spang, like it hisses at you because it's 85 miles per hour. Spang, spang. I'm like, wow, I'm going to die. So I'm looking at the whole weekend. I'm like I'm going to the batting cages. I'm like, oh, I'm going to die. So I show up on set on Monday and they take one look at me and they go, "Who are you?" And I go, "I'm your catcher." And they go, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "Okay." And they're like, "Well, why don't you follow us over to the prop tent?" I'm like, "Okay." So I go over to the prop tent and the prop guy's like, "Oh, so you're the catcher?" And I'm like, "Yes." And he goes, "So you caught in college?" I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "Where'd you go to college?" I go, "Yeah, I went to the University of Texas." So he's like, "Oh, so you were the catcher at the University of Texas?" I'm like, "Yes." And then proceed to give me a bunch of Diamondbacks costume stuff that's all way too big for me. It's all way too big for me. I'm not a catcher. I have bad knees. I'm not a good baseball player. So like, okay, well, follow. Sometimes you go on sets. I've been on a million sets. You go there and you like sit around for 6 hours. You know, not this time. They're like, "Okay, follow us." And they take me to the baseball diamond and there's Randy Johnson standing on the mound. And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to die." And they go, "Okay, let's do it." And they put me right in there and I sit over home plate and they got a batter right there and the batter's right over me. And I'm sitting there and looking, there's Randy Johnson, 6'9", he's going to pitch me. And he begins his windup. If you ever see the video of like the guy who pitches and it like hits a pigeon and it's like a lightning bolt exploding a pillow, that's Randy Johnson. So there he is. Now I'm looking at him. He's looking at me. He's doing his windup. And then they call cut in the middle of his windup. And then the ball goes about 10 million miles that way, away from me. And now Randy Johnson is pissed. Now he's pissed. He goes, "Never call timeout or cut in the middle of my windup again." And I'm like, I'm going to die. So they give him back the ball, and I'm like there, and like everything, and he pitches the ball, and I catch the ball right on the palm of my hand, and I think I broke every bone
Oh my God.
in my hand, but I can't show pain because I need this job. So I go back to throw the baseball back to Randy Johnson, and I reach back and I go, and the ball, my hand hits the helmet, and the mask goes that way, and the helmet goes that way, and the ball goes that way. And that's how I died. The end. I just wanted to give you a dumb story.
I love it. Also, did you must have broken a couple bones in your hand if you palmed that thing. Like were you
Dude.
somehow I hope it was a decent catcher's mitt at least. I played baseball for many years, so I
brought my own mitt because I knew a guy who was a catcher, so I brought but it was terrible, and it's I never actually saw the episode. It was a TV show on Disney called The Jersey. I actually wound up working that show again, and then like another dude like broke his nose. We were playing ice hockey, but like I mean it's just ridiculous. So I died. And but I lived long enough to get through this. I just wanted to say a stupid story because
Man,
like, I don't know if there's any entertainment.
I thought so. That's I mean, to be able to catch a ball from Randy Johnson, and anybody who's, I guess, like maybe Gen Z doesn't know who Randy Johnson is, but I'm pretty sure like the majority of millennials and anyone above that does, which is like that's pretty fucking badass. I'm not gonna lie.
In my day,
like,
I didn't have any money or any internet. All I had were dirt and rocks, and I had to catch Randy Johnson, and it was hard.
And this is, I could not imagine a better note to end on, Joel. This was a treat. I appreciate your time. Where do you want to send people?
I want to send people. I want to send people away from me.
That's too bad. I'm linking you in the show notes.
I'm just on Twitter. I have a small. I have a
Noster.
And Noster.
I'm going to find you on there.
I'm on a TV show. It's the top rated TV show on Fox right now. It's a small recurring role. I'm only in episodes 7 and 12 this year, but it's like I'm just a low level actor, so it's like I got my name on the same call sheet as like Rob Lowe. So it's like, hey,
Nice.
that's cool. Yeah. So I just have like a small recurring part on that. The one bad thing about Bitcoin is that it can put you into a position where maybe you don't have to work. So I don't know if I'm retired, or not retired, or I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll be on that when that airs, and then I'm on Twitter. Sorry, I apologize to everyone out there on Twitter.
I know. I think you're a great follow. You ever think you'll get back into kind of the early days of? Now they wouldn't call them web series, but you ever think you'll get back into that kind of content creation?
The environment was so different now, because then it was it's funny because we were once voted the most masculine website on the internet. We had like a 90%, back the demographics of the internet back then, it was mostly male and nerds, right? And so what happened was, it's so funny. The demographic really shifted over the years where it went from male, masculine nerds and to by the end, it was mostly female. And I think that was a function of the whole internet, where I think it just changed, where it's the social media. And again, that's a story of adoption. And again, it's this is why I brought a lot of that stuff up about the website and adoption, where it's again, it's I remember driving across the desert from Texas going to LA and listening to people buying URLs back in the 90s. I'm people are buying URLs. I'm why? What's that? That was Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor was buying URLs. And
so many.
I had to go through. Right, but it's nobody understood back then, right? Where it's the URLs, or it's the whole argument back then was no one's going to put their credit card number on the internet. That's crazy. And it's just sort of this is kind of where we are with Bitcoin, where again, it's just sort of people don't understand the adoption curves, and it's it's uncomfortable and it's weird and it's different, but it's like the internet, it's not going away. It's not going away. And it's so it's just adoption cycles are funny. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it literally week to week. A year ago, what was the narrative, and what's the narrative now? And the narrative now is well, if the U.S. government doesn't have it or has a listen to the conversation you're having.
Yeah,
you're talking about having a reserve. They're talking about having a reserve. Yeah. Assets. Listen to the conversation we're having. Okay, maybe they won't have it, but that's better than
they're talking about it though.
That's better than making it illegal.
Right.
It's Janet Yellen, my biggest enemy on the. I disagree with her on everything, but she was standing on the steps of the Treasury, going, "Satoshi's innovation is real." Right, and so it's happening. And the mistake I made, again, was not understanding early adoption. And we're still early. So it's if someone's out there and it's this is a little uncomfortable, that means you're still early. That's good.
That's opportunity, right?
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. I hope this didn't suck.
I loved it. I appreciate, Bitcoin is scarce, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for sharing that scarce time of yours on another fucking Bitcoin podcast, of which there are many. But yeah, this was a treat. I appreciate your time sincerely. And I'm going to force you to come back on here, and I'm going to badger you to do it on Noster, just so you know.
No, I'm going to lurking. But I appreciate that so much. I mean, maybe I don't know. Once I can afford an island, then maybe we'll go from.
All right, it's an island date.
Walker, thank you so much. I so sincerely appreciate it, and thanks for everyone listening. I hope something I said made some sense.
There was a lot of sense, or should I say there was a lot of sats made today?
A lot of sats.
That was a bad joke. Okay, we're cutting it now. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring another fucking Bitcoin podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor. If you're enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast, consider giving the show a 5-star review wherever you listen, or sharing the show with your friends, family, and strangers on the internet. Or don't, Bitcoin doesn't care, but I always appreciate it. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/Walker. If you want to follow The Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Or just go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast and find links everywhere. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.